It was the week of Mr. and Mrs. Green's anniversary. Mrs. Green awoke and found Mr. Green out and about and a card waiting for her. Mrs. Green couldn't imagine what Mr. Green had up his sleeve until she stepped outside. Mr. Green had planned a picnic just for Mrs. Green. Mr. Green had thought of everything: flowers, her favorite book, a hat, and refreshments. Ampersand sat close by and was so pleased with himself because he had kept the secret. Mrs. Green settled herself in, made herself comfortable, and enjoyed every moment. As she sat and enjoyed the morning, Mrs. Green thought about Mr. Green. She thought about how thoughtful he was and how well he knew her and how long they had been together and been married. She also wondered where he could be and what he was up to. As she waited and wondered about Mr. Green, she read from one of her favorite books. The tables were laden with trembled salads, plates of sandwiches, hand-painted dishes of candies and nuts. Mrs. Ray sat behind the silver coffee pot at one end, and at the other stood Anna's masterpiece, a great gleaming cake trimmed with flowers, ribbons, and a dove. Mrs. Green had read this book so many times she could quote it by heart. It was just like Mr. Green to know that Maud Hart Lovelace should be an important part of any Mrs. Green picnic. When Mr. Green arrived home, he found Mrs. Green picking wild violets and making wild violet and lemon tea. Mrs. Green looked at Mr. Green's face and she knew he had more surprises in store. They were off on an anniversary adventure, all planned by Mr. Green. It seemed that the whole world was cooperating that day. The sky was blue and the clouds were white. It was beautiful. Mrs. Green followed Mr. Green without question. She wanted her surprise to unfold. Mrs. Green was so enchanted by the little town that Mr. Green chose for their romantic day out. He knew how much she liked to take her time in little shops. She loved to rediscover old treasures that had been forgotten. Mrs. Green realized that it was their anniversary, but Mr. Green had planned the entire day around things that she loved. This was one of the wonderful things about being married to Mr. Green. And though Mrs. Green had not planned the day, she wanted to give Mr. Green an opportunity to enjoy the things he liked as well. And just as Mrs. Green tried to incorporate some of the things she thought Mr. Green would like, Mr. Green revealed another surprise. Mr. Green had remembered that Mrs. Green had recently said that she thought train rides were very romantic. As they boarded the train, Mr. and Mrs. Green had the opportunity to sit and talk and reminisce and enjoy the scenery. The train had a short layover where they could get off the train and explore a little farm. The first thing they came upon were a pair of geese. This seemed so sweet to Mrs. Green because geese mate for life after all. They were beautiful to watch as they swam in the water, one looking after the other. They walked around the farm and enjoyed the day, looking for hidden treasures and animals that other people might not notice. When it came to exploring and noticing details, Mr. and Mrs. Green were a good pair. Each of them were quick to point out the things the other might find interesting. And when it was time to get back on the train and head toward the station, they did not feel the need to talk. They just took in the scenery and enjoyed each other's company. You see, Mr. and Mrs. Green had been together a very long time. And as they walked back to the car hand in hand, they felt blessed. That sense of gratitude that they had, that appreciation for the other person, for the things around them, the things they got to do, the life they got to live, was their secret. And as Mrs. Green unpacked her treasures from the day, she began to think of what she might do for Mr. Green next week. She thought about how geese mate for life and how one looks after the other, and she was excited to come up with some things for Mr. Green. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Next week I will tell you more about how Mr. and Mrs. Green enjoy their anniversary.